The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of ochre and gold beneath a sky that burned like a forge. In the stillness, even the wind dared not move. The Apache warriors crouched low behind the rocks, their faces painted with earth and ash, eyes scanning the horizon for the dust plume that meant riders were coming. Each heartbeat was a drumbeat of fate, every breath sharp as a blade. This was not a skirmish for glory, it was a fight for survival, for the land that had shaped their bones and blood. But what truly happened when an Apache war party met its enemy in the raw fury of battle? Let's find out. Before a battle began, the land itself seemed to pause. The Apache warriors were masters of stillness, their bodies melting into the stones, mesquite, and shadows until they were no more than whispers of the earth. Scouts returned with silent signals, fingers curling, eyes narrowing, to mark the enemy's approach. In those moments, the world became sharper. The taste of dust on the tongue, the scent of horse sweat carried on the wind, the faint creak of leather far in the distance. The drums had fallen silent days ago, replaced by the deeper rhythm of preparation. Spears were sharpened, bows restrung, and every arrowhead kissed with flint's razor edge. The elders moved among the warriors, murmuring words of power, reminders of ancestors who had stood in this same place, who had bled into this same soil. The warriors painted their faces with streaks of black and red, colors of the raven and the sun. The enemy would come, thinking they faced men. What they would meet instead was the land itself, risen up in fury.
When the Apache rode, they did not thunder across the earth. They glided over it, swift and silent as shadows under the moon. Each warrior knew every fold of the land, the gullies where horses' hooves could vanish from sight, and the narrow draws where sound carried like a whisper instead of a shout. Their horses were not just mounts, they were kin. Small, fast, and tireless, trained to halt on a single touch or bolt forward in an instant. The warriors moved with them as though they shared one body, crouched low against the neck, lances angled like the claws of an eagle diving. In the night before battle, the war party moved into position. Some rode far ahead to lure the enemy into a trap, disappearing into the desert only to reappear where least expected. Others circled wide, flanking unseen. The enemy, riding heavier horses and carrying bulkier gear, often never realized they were being surrounded until the arrows began to fall. The Apache were not bound by the rules of open battle, they were bound only by victory and survival. The first arrows came like the hiss of serpents, unseen until they struck. A rider toppled, clutching his chest. Another's horse screamed and fell, throwing him hard into the dirt. Dust exploded upward, mixing with the cries of men and animals until the air itself seemed to choke on chaos. The Apache did not charge all at once. They struck like lightning in a summer storm, sudden and scattered, so the enemy could never find the center of the attack. One moment they were ahead, another they were on the flank, and always the arrows kept falling. When the distance closed, the sound of battle shifted. Arrows gave way to the wet thud of stone-headed war clubs and the sharp crack of lances piercing shields. Warriors darted in and out of reach, striking and vanishing before a sword could turn. Above it all, the sun burned red through the dust cloud, turning the whole scene into something out of legend. To those caught in it, there was no time to think, only to fight or fall.
The battle surged toward a narrow canyon, its walls rising like the ribs of a great beast. Here, the Apache had chosen their ground with the precision of a hunter setting a snare. The canyon funneled the enemy inward, stripping them of their numbers, their speed, and their advantage. From above, hidden in crevices and behind boulders, warriors loosed arrows and hurled stones, the missiles falling like rain in a summer flash flood. Horses reared, riders cried out, and the canyon walls threw the sound back in deafening echoes. When the front ranks faltered, the Apache dropped down from the cliffs, their war cries cutting through the din. In the crush of that rocky throat, there was no room to swing a long sword, no space for a gallop, only the brutal intimacy of hand-to-hand combat. War clubs, knives, and short lances ruled here. The enemy's steel clashed against stone weapons, but the stone did not break. It shattered bone. It came in the heart of the fighting, a single cry, sharp and high, piercing through the chaos like an eagle's scream. It was the Go-Chi, the battle call of the Apache, a sound that could unstring a man's courage faster than an arrow could pierce his chest. To the warriors, it was a signal, a surge of spirit, a reminder that the ancestors fought beside them. To their enemies, it was a reminder of how far from home they were, how alien and hostile this land had become. The cry was answered by others, rising from every corner of the battlefield until it felt as though the earth itself was howling. Horses shivered, and even seasoned fighters felt the weight of fear in their guts. The Apache pressed harder, striking at the flanks, severing lines of retreat. In the noise, confusion bloomed like fire in dry grass, and soon the enemy no longer fought to win, they fought to escape. By late afternoon, the sun hung low, its light filtered through a haze of dust and smoke. The air stank of sweat, blood, and trampled sage. The Apache warriors moved like ghosts now, finishing what the morning had begun. Isolated riders were dragged from their saddles, weapons were stripped from fallen hands, and enemy horses were driven off into the desert. Atop the mesa, elders and younger boys watched the battle's end, learning with their eyes what would one day live in their hands. Below them, the survivors of the enemy fled in small, desperate groups, some throwing away shields and armor to run faster. The red sun cast long shadows that seemed to stretch toward tomorrow, a warning that this land was not easily taken. The Apache gathered their dead, carrying them back with songs of honor, and left the battlefield silent except for the whisper of the wind. A wind that would carry the story of this day far across the desert. The enemy's retreat was cut short by the looming wall of the sacred cliffs, a place the Apache believed to be watched over by the spirits of their ancestors. Here, the last cornered riders turned to make their final stand. The cliffs glowed crimson in the fading light, and every strike of steel or stone seemed to echo in the hollow spaces between their peaks. The Apache closed in, not with reckless haste, but with the patience of hunters tightening a snare. They knew the land would favor them, the shadows swallowing their movements until they were upon their foes like sudden storms. In those final, desperate moments, the battle was not swift. It was a grinding test of endurance. Blades against bone, shields against arrows, cries against the wind, and when the dust finally settled, the last enemy fell, their blood seeping into the same earth they had sought to claim. When the fight was over, the desert grew still again. The mesas and canyons held the silence as if guarding the memory of what had taken place. Apache warriors moved among the fallen, gathering supplies, tending to the wounded, and speaking quiet words over the bodies of kin. Fires were lit not for celebration, but for ceremony. The elders sang into the night, songs that bound the living and the dead in the same circle. Those who had survived carried with them not only the scars of battle, but also the stories, the warnings, and the pride of victory. Days later, when the winds swept through the canyons, they seemed to carry the voices of that day. The war cries, the clash of weapons, and the pounding of hooves. And for those who listened closely, the wind whispered the truth. The Apache did not fight for conquest. They fought for the very breath of their people. This was not just a battle, it was the desert itself, risen in defiance, fought through the hands of its fiercest protectors. The Apache left no doubt that the land was theirs, not by claim, but by blood. Would you have survived a day in their world? Share your thoughts below and keep the stories alive.